this video, we're going to talk about 5 different types of sampling. We're going to go through the most common 5. Of course, you can mix these up, and there are a lot more different types of sampling than the ones that we're going to cover. To talk about these, I'm going to talk about them with regards to an example. Say we're interested in doing a standardized test in a school district to determine how that school district performs, right? You give standardized tests in school districts all the time, so that way you can compare one school district to another, and people can decide where they're going to live based off of that school district, right? So based off of those standardized test results. Okay, so the random sampling approach, what this would do, if you were giving a standardized test to everyone, for the entire school district, then in a random sampling approach, you say you didn't have enough money to give the standardized test to every pupil, right? So every pupil in the school district is the population, but you're not going to give it to everyone in the population, right? You're just going to give the standardized test to some of the pupils in the school district. So in a random sample, every student would have an equal opportunity of being selected, right? So you would create a list, a database maybe, with every student's name, and you'd have every student from every school in some sort of huge database, and then you would go through and you would select randomly in that database using some sort of random number generator, or using some sort of computer algorithm to do it randomly. Okay, so that'd be random sampling. It's pretty simple. Systematic sampling, what you do is you would maybe you could say, well, I don't want to do random sampling because I'm worried that I'm going to get a bunch of my students who are very poor performers, or a bunch that are very good performers, and it's just going to be random chance that sample is going to contain either performers that are they're poor, or maybe misrepresent the school district by being too good, and that can happen randomly. You could have just by chance selected a bunch of poor performing students, for example. Okay, so in systematic sampling, you go ahead and you line up all the students, maybe according to their grade. It could be according to anything, but you would, maybe their last name. Usually people would line them up in some sort of meaningful order. But according to your grade, if you're worried that you're going to oversample the poor performing students, then you could maybe line them up according to their GPA, and then say, okay, so I'm going to start at a random place. Maybe I'll start on the second person, and I'm going to sample every 3 people, every 3 students, right? So in this case, a third of the students would get sampled, right? And so that would be a systematic way of sampling, to make sure that you're getting a good distribution of students with different GPAs. Next, we have convenience sampling. This one makes a lot of sense. It means it's exactly what it says, convenience. So you have some students that are available, hanging out. They just select those students, right? So just select the students that are available, and want to take the test, right? The convenient students to sample, just sample those guys. This method of sampling is it's not as good. Sometimes it's the only type of sampling that you can do, and when it's the only type of sampling that can be done, then there's merit in using it. However, most of the time it will create a biased sample. Okay, because why were these students available, right? Why are these students convenient to be sampled, right? So you have to think about that, and think about the bias that enters the sampling when you've sampled in this manner. Okay. Next we have is stratified sampling. So in stratified sampling, you might be, say, you're concerned that if you were to do the random sampling approach, that you don't get the students, enough students from the different schools. Right? So maybe, for example, one of your schools is really big school, and then the other ones are really small. So if you do random sampling, you're likely to only, it's a possibility that you could have your random sample come all entirely from this really big school. Right? And then the smaller schools don't have an opportunity to get sampled, right? So in stratified sampling, what you do, you say, okay, so I have these naturally forming groups, these naturally forming strata, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get, maybe I'm going to randomly sample. You could randomly sample the same number of students from each of the schools, or you could do different number from each of the schools, just as long as you have set your groups up ahead of time, and then you're randomly sampling from within each of those strata. Okay, so say I'm going to get 5 students from this school, 5 students from that school, 5 students from that school, 5 students from that school. I'm going to randomly select those 5 students from within those groups. That would be stratified sampling. Okay. Lastly, we have cluster sampling. In this method of sampling, you would have, again, just like how in stratified sampling you have, groups. Say we had the different classrooms, and instead of picking a particular student randomly, it may be easier to pick a classroom than it is to pick a student randomly, right? Because if you pull a student from a class to take a test, that's really disruptive. So instead of pulling students from a classroom, what you could do is you could make a list of all of your different classrooms, right? So basically change the sampling unit, whereas before it used to be, different students, right? These are students sitting in a classroom, right? I know, I'm such an artist, right? So I have all these students sitting in the classroom. Instead of just randomly selecting the different students, what we do is we randomly select entire classrooms. Okay, so in this way, we have avoided potential issues with pulling a student out of the classroom. So randomly selecting an entire group is what cluster sampling is. Different than stratified sampling. In that stratified sampling, you have the groups and you randomly sample from within those groups. This is randomly selecting the entire group, right? If that classroom is selected, every person in that classroom gets to participate in the sample.